Tim Kilduff, and this is Business Matters. This is not just a program about Hopkinton businesses, but more about the people who run them. Lots of interesting businesses in Hopkinton, lots of interesting people who are doing interesting things for a living. This morning is no exception. We're joined this morning by Ron Foisey. Ron is what he describes himself as a college advisor for something called College Planning Strategies. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Ron, this is the subject matter, the area in which you work is so topical. I think we've got to move pretty quickly, but let's focus first of all about a little bit about you and how you got to this point in your career. And we don't have to go back to the day you were born, but how about your education background first?
Well, let me stay on topic with the planning part of this thing. In 1994, I got into the financial planning business. I spent 4 years studying for and earning my CFP designation, and did traditional financial planning for a number of years. So investment management, retirement planning, planning for college, and kind of followed a traditional approach to planning. And as time went on, I began to notice very quickly that paying for college and coming up with the money to pay for college was overwhelming every other aspect of what I was doing. And that kind of led to a change of my focus in 2005, where I became 100% focused on planning for college.
So how did you get that background? I mean, it's a big country, a lot of colleges. How do you begin to grasp the total field?
Well, there are a number of national organizations that are involved in college planning as a specialty. Some financial planners do it as a sidelight, other people jump into it full time. I went through the national training programs and basically took my formal CFP training and blended the two together.
Well, you gotta. I know you understand, and I know you keep a good track of what's happening in the world. But it appears to me that the cost of colleges is now one of the most staggering economic factors facing people in the United States. Is that an overstatement? No,
it's not at all. And in fact, it's really important for people to answer the question: is college worth it? So when you're looking at the University of Massachusetts cost of attendance being over $25,000 per year, MIT at $57,000 a year, Quinnipiac, I mean, you go through the NESCAC schools, you're talking $50,000 to $60,000 per year for the private schools and $18,000 to $25,000 for the public schools. Most families are hard pressed to afford that kind of an expense.
When you say $25,000 for UMass, what does that include?
That's an all-in cost. It's tuition and fees, room and board, books, travel, miscellaneous fees. That's a number that is accepted by the Department of Education as the total cost up to which you can borrow college loans.
So if somebody was going in, wanted to go to UMass, could they borrow the $25,000?
They could borrow up to $25,000 through the federal loan programs.
Wow.
And an interesting side note to that, this year for the first time in history, student loan debt is exceeding credit card debt in this country. And that is a crisis. It's a catastrophe waiting to happen.
What about the return on those loans? What's the rate of return? How long does it take a student to, let's say, pay off $25,000, $30,000 worth of student loans?
The payoff period for the federal loan programs run anywhere from 10 to 30 years. Obviously, if it takes you 30 years to pay off a student loan, the amount of interest you're going to pay on that is absolutely staggering. But what's, the worst part today, when you're looking at an unemployment rate at 9.1% in this country, a lot of the 2009, 2010, 2011 college graduates are not working in the field that they were trained for. They're out waiting on tables and bartending, and there's a huge problem with student loan defaults right now. The last 2-year period of time that the records have been released, student loan defaults are up 25.7%. And that number is going to continue to increase.
There are people demonstrating under a couple of different banners all over the United States. The young people, it appears that a number of them would be considered younger, recent college graduates. How much of what they're talking about can be factored into the cost of their education, if at all?
I'm certain that it is a factor in a lot of people's lives, that they're buried under the debt of their college experience. And all too often kids are going to the wrong schools for the wrong reasons and ending up pursuing a line of education that really isn't preparing them for life in the realities of the 21st century.
Do you see in your work, do you see people now talking more about their students, their children going to a community college? There is a system, I think, that would be more cost effective, is there not?
There's no question about that. In other regions of the country, the Midwest, the West Coast, community college is a vibrant part of the educational system, where a majority of the kids are going to community college for a couple of years and then feeding right into one of the major four-year universities where they'll get their undergraduate degree. That almost cuts the cost of education in half. Okay.
Wow.
But the model there, the community colleges have dorms on them, they have sports programs. It's every bit a college experience that the kids are looking for here. It's just at a more local level.
Isn't that a tough sell, though? I mean, if
it is
a student in Hopkinton, let's talk about Hopkinton for a minute.
Yeah,
right? Sure. High percentage kids go on to school. I don't know what it is. You probably know.
It's over 97%.
Okay, 97%. I would think it would be a challenge in the environment that we've created here.
Sure.
To get a high school senior to think about going to a community college. Is that?
There's a tremendous amount of peer pressure. What schools are you getting into? And that peer pressure is kid to kid. It's also parent to parent. I mean, if you're running around Colella's on a Saturday afternoon and you bump into somebody else, well, where are your kids applying to? He says, well, Mass Bay and Quinnipiac are the two top choices. That would be a stunning conversation to have in Hopkinton. It's how many, I'm applying to BC or Notre Dame or USC. That's what people are talking about.
So in your work, is that part of it? The sort of the advising, counseling part of it?
A lot of it is how to get the right fit school for the kid. And that's a major disconnect for a lot of kids, because they're looking at schools, well, where are my best friends going? Where's my boyfriend going? Where's my girlfriend going? Those kinds of issues are driving a lot of these school choice issues, and those aren't necessarily the right fit schools.
So let's take an example. Get a high school senior, let's say it's male, average grades, whatever that means in average,
Sure.
average college boards. Interested, not quite sure what path they want to take. How do you begin? And I would imagine there'll be a lot of kids in that category.
Yeah, there's close to 35% of all kids that are completely undecided when they go off to school as to what they want to study. So in that cohort, you're really looking for a base liberal arts education. We just don't know what we're going into at this point. And in those situations, we've got a terrific state school system here that, whether it's Westfield State or the UMass schools or Framingham State, there are a lot of terrific schools. And in the surrounding New England states, we've got some great programs. The state school system is very good at taking those undecided kids and giving a good baseline of information at a reasonable price. It's still expensive, but it's reasonable relative to everything else that's out there.
So these state schools, are they in the $25,000 range?
Yeah, 18 to 25.
Wow.
Now, if you go out of state, if somebody said, well, I really like University of Connecticut down in Storrs, out of state kids are paying over $40,000 for a state school education.
That true if you wanted to go to the University of Wyoming? Does it fluctuate, or is it pretty standard?
No, when you get outside of New England, prices are very different. State schools outside of New England in the Midwest and some of the mid-Atlantic states are better price performers, okay? but over 90% of New England kids stay in New England to go to college.
Are parents now, and students, factoring in cost of the education when thinking about a college, or starting to narrow the list down, or is it still, gee, Dad, I want to go to...
If you want to keep the focus on Hopkinton, a lot of Hopkinton kids and their parents are committed to allow their kids to whatever school they can get themselves into. And cost is not the issue at this point. And that goes back to a number of studies saying parents are really shooting themselves in the foot by foregoing saving for their retirement and putting everything into the kids' education.
This can't be when you, in your work, and you share that particular comment, it can't be necessarily received positively all the time, is it?
Well, we can advise people, but I mean, parents are committed to their kids. I mean, we see it in sports, we see it in academics. I mean, we're putting everything in the line to give our kids the best opportunity in this 21st century world that we're living in. But the money is kind of the last thing on the thing. How do I borrow enough money to pay for this? How do I get this through this? I don't want my kids to come out of school with any loans. Well, 10, 15 years from now, there's going to be a realization that, boy, I might not have enough money in my account to retire comfortably.
So this education issue, the cost of education, is now clearly linked to one's potential and future retirement.
For retirement. There's a direct link between the two. Because every dollar that you spend on college is probably $10 or $20 that's not going to be available for your retirement fund, because when you spend it, it's gone. There's no more future compounding of that money to save up for retirement.
Right. I think we're hearing, at least I've noticed recently, that the more talk in the major media about the retirement issue. What's your sense? It's tough to put a figure on that, but how often do you see people get themselves again, potentially get themselves in trouble with this cost of education? Do they even consider it?
Of course they consider it, but education is immediate. It's right in front of them. It's right now. I'll deal with retirement down the road. Let's not worry about that right now. I mean, you can look at data all over the place that less than 20% of all people have enough money or are on track to retire comfortably. It's a scary statistic. And when you factor in the cost of health care down the road, Fidelity released a study, said that a couple age 65 is going to need over $350,000 just to cover their out-of-pocket health care costs. Where's that money coming from?
Wait a minute, repeat that.
Couple age 65 is going to need at least $350,000 to cover their out-of-pocket health care costs.
For the remainder of their life?
For their lifetime. Now that's, that's one study from one organization. But the point is, directionally, our biotech and healthcare system is getting so good, we're going to be staying alive longer.
Yeah.
And we've got less and less money to stay alive. The pension plans aren't there that used to be there. It's a scary scenario going forward.
In your business, obviously you do a lot of one-on-one. But is that business model, one-on-one advising and counseling, is it changing?
It's changing a lot, and part of the reason that our model has been successful is that the high school guidance departments are overwhelmed.
Yeah.
On a national basis, the average guidance counselor has 426 kids that they're dealing with, and they spend 38 minutes on a high school kid talking to them about college. That's not enough time. So there's a huge demand. Admissions competition is going through the roof. Northeastern University this last year had 43,000 applications. Now think about that.
For how many openings?
A little over 4,000 openings.
Wow.
43,000, and part of the reason is they've got a tremendously successful co-op model,
right,
where they're placing 99% of their graduates into jobs. So people are looking at it saying, if I'm going to spend close to $60,000 a year for school, at least I've got a good shot at going there. And their admissions numbers are tremendous. The test scores, grade point averages, it's become a very difficult school to get into.
You know, that's interesting too, because does it boil down with an institute, and we don't want to pick on Northeastern because it does have an outrageously positive image in the work that they do with their co-op. They've been doing that for years. But does it become, how does a student then distinguish themselves if you've got 40 some odd applying for 4,000?
Well, it's a tremendous question, Tim, because the stress that's put on our high school students right now as junior, senior year, the standards keep going up. The test scores go up, the grade point average, the community service. What do I have to do to get into my top schools? And if you take that up another level and say, well, let's just look at the top 50 most competitive schools out there. All the Ivies, the public Ivies, the NESCAC schools. How do I get into those? There's a group down in Cambridge that has a 4-day boot camp that they run just on admissions counseling to get into that. And you know, the amount that they charge for this boot camp to me is staggering. But there's so much pressure to get into the top schools. People are willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars just to get help on the admissions process alone.
Wow, you mentioned juniors and seniors. Ideally, when should the process start? You know, I
Right.
hear somebody, well, it's
Yeah.
my daughter, I've heard this, you know, my daughter or son in first grade, are they Ivy material or are they state school material? That might be an extreme, but
Well,
when do you have to start?
Obviously, the parents need to start immediately. So that, you know, when you find out you're having a baby, you should be thinking about this stuff. The reality of our society is, until the kids are in high school, very few people are thinking about it critically. And then sophomore, junior, and senior year are when the hands-on college planning starts full blown. I mean, it's a marathon. So
Yeah.
when you're going to run a marathon, you've got to do a lot of training up front, and then the marathon itself is a long journey, and that's what juniors and seniors in high school are going through today.
Do you find people now beginning to talk about whether their student should go to college? Are they looking at other options? Is that, you hear talk about that, the trades and that sort of thing, but is that on the upswing?
You still hear talk about it, but the reality is the kids are still going to college in huge numbers. From 1999 to 2009, there were 32% more kids enrolled in college in that decade. That's a third more in that one decade. And that's part of the problem with the cost going as much as it is that there's so much demand for the seats. Colleges can get away with charging whatever they want.
In your work, do you hear any hope that maybe the colleges as a group or individually are thinking about the costs of an education?
Now, I think it's even the opposite of that. A recent article by a professor at Johns Hopkins, a political science guy, wrote a nice piece talking about the fact that colleges are going to be collapsing under the weight of their own administration. They're adding layers and layers of deans and vice presidents and management inside these colleges, and it's starving the teachers for resources and the professors. So there's no constraint on them. It's almost like the industrial model in the 50s and 60s when Ford and General Motors, they didn't care what they charged for a car because they paid their workers. They just keep adding people to the company and raising the cost. Colleges have been doing that for the last 20 years.
Wow. What do we do about this?
Well, I don't think there's anything that we can do. I think that the system is going to create a cure for us, and that cure is going to be when the student loan marketplace blows up. There's a bubble coming in student lending, and when that blows up, similar to what happened in the housing market, when mortgages and that whole mortgage market collapsed in 2008, what happened to the price of housing? It went down for the first time in 20 years. We're expecting that until that same kind of thing happens with student loans, when people can't borrow money to pay for school, then at that point the schools are going to take a hard look at what they're charging and whether they're getting value.
You know, I've never thought about it this way, but who funds those student loans? Is it the federal government? Are they private banks?
A big part of the whole financial aid is coming from the federal government. There's over $150 billion worth of loans or financial aid available every year. 43% of that comes from federal student loans and federal parent loans for undergraduate students. So a lot of it is coming through the federal government. Now, in addition to that, once you tap out your federal student loans, you go to the public or the private sector,
right,
banks, credit unions, and get additional student loans to fund those as well.
You know, as you know, because we can't miss the number of Republican debates, and the president just came out with a number of suggestions around this particular issue. This subject area, I think, is going to increase in interest. But it's not as easy as simply saying. One of the candidates the other day said, "Let's wipe out student loan programs." It's not that. It's not quite that simple, is it?
Well, it isn't that simple. If it were, if you got rid of all the student loans, there would be a lot of empty seats for the people in America to attend school, because most families, I mean, less than 2% of all families have saved up enough money to put their kids through school. So they've got to borrow it from someplace. Now, when you look at an international draw, our college and university system here is better than any in the world.
Right.
And we could fill up every seat in New England from China and India alone if we didn't have student loans. So you say, well, let's get rid of it. Well, the long-term consequences of a drastic action like that would be catastrophic.
Will this, in your sound judgment, will this be a political issue that will be debated between now and a year from now in the election?
I think it has to be. It has to be, because there's this huge chunk of the baby boomer population now. We're kind of moving through the echo boomer kids that are now getting ready for college. There's a big chunk of our national population that's dealing with this issue today.
Well, you know, this subject is obviously of a critical nature, but we've got a few minutes left. Let's get very specific and talk a little bit about how you would work with a local family. You know, from step one. Let's focus on that, and then I really think that with the subject matter that we've covered, it might be a good thing. I know you do some work with the HPTA, but it might be a good thing to come back and really go through a step-by-step process to be of help. But so in the next 2 or 3 minutes,
right?
What are the steps?
Yeah, I think realistically, you have to start at the beginning and working with the families, so mom and dad and the students, and help them to create some kind of a profile of what it is that the kids are suited to do. So it's kind of aptitude testing based on interest, ambitions, and desires, what kind of careers or majors, and then begin to match them up with some schools. And then once you begin to match them up with some schools, what is it going to take for them to get into those programs in terms of test prepping, grades, what kind of courses? And some high school systems in the greater Boston area do a terrific job at that. Others are a little bit lacking, but it's got to get done. And we come alongside of the high school guidance department and assist them, just based on the fact that there's more demand for time than is out there. And ultimately, the family's got to really take stock of the fact, how much can we really afford? And if you start answering that question when they're beginning high school, and the kids have some sense of reasonableness, then I think more rational decisions are going to be made.
And that process starts freshman in high school?
It needs to start freshman, sophomore year. The parents need to start a little bit earlier from a dollar and cent standpoint. It's a little bit more difficult to get the kids engaged until closer to the end of their sophomore year on average. They're not focused on college yet.
In the work that you do, if we could talk about a hope that you might have, a goal, what would it be?
Well, I think to make sure that everybody, every family out there is taking full advantage of all the aid packages and financial aid that's available. And if there's no aid out there, coming up with a strategic way to pay for college without completely destroying, all of their wealth and their potential for a successful retirement down the road. Because it is an education problem, but it's a retirement problem at the same time.
And is it fair to say that you can help create that strategy?
Oh, that's our experience. I mean, in our office in Medway, we've got over 70 years of hands-on college planning experience.
Well, Ron, we've only scratched the surface here. And I think it would be, if you'd be willing, it'd be, I think, a smart thing to have you back, and maybe we sketch out a very specific 30 minutes where we can provide some service to the community. But we're glad you're here. We're glad you're in Hopkins. We even talk about your attitude about the community, but next time we'll do that.
We'll do that. I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me on.
Every mile brings us closer.
25.
Every mile in a city near you.
7.5 miles.
Help us stop diabetes.
12.
Join the Tour de Cure. Register to ride.
36.
Or sponsor a rider.
30.
35.
Call 1-888-DIABETES or visit us online at diabetes.org/tour. How many miles will you ride?
25.